You know that feeling, right? That knot in your stomach. Your heart starts racing, and that little voice in your head just screams, "Stop!" Yeah, that's fear. And, for most of us, that's kind of where the story ends. But what if it wasn't a stop sign? What if what if it was actually pointing you exactly where you need to go? So today, we're asking a really important question. Is fear a stop sign, or is it a compass? All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about why fear isn't the enemy we think it is. Then, we'll get into the big idea, fear as a stop sign versus a compass. After that, we'll peek under the hood at the science of how our brain actually calculates courage. And to wrap it all up, we'll give you a practical toolkit you can start using right away. So first things first, feeling fear doesn't mean you're weak or that something's wrong with you. It just means you're human. Fear is totally universal, and honestly, it's a necessary part of our wiring. So the goal isn't to get rid of it, but to actually change our relationship with it.
I love this quote from a 17th century French general. It just perfectly captures that inner conversation we have. It's like his mind is talking directly to his body, saying, yeah, I know you're scared, I feel you trembling, but we're going anyway. It frames courage not as some magic power, but as a conversation, a negotiation between your mind and your body.
We have this idea that courageous people are fearless, but that's just a total myth. Real courage, like it says here, is all about priorities. It's about looking your fear straight in the eye, then looking at your goal, and making a conscious choice that the goal is worth more. It's a calculation, a deliberate assessment, not a lack of feeling.
And this isn't just some nice theory. History is packed with examples. I mean, think about it. Right before launching the D-Day invasion, General Eisenhower's hand was shaking so badly he couldn't even hold a coffee cup. Winston Churchill, this icon of strength, privately battled crippling depression all through the war. And even today, a guy like big wave surfer Laird Hamilton says that if he doesn't feel fear, it means he's not taking the situation seriously enough. So yeah, fear is part of the process for absolutely everyone.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the two completely different ways we can interpret fear. This is where we all face a choice. Do we let that feeling stop us dead in our tracks, or do we use it to find our true north?
This slide breaks it down perfectly. On the one hand, you've got what you might call the ego's take on things. That's the part of us that just wants to stay safe. It sees fear as a big red stop sign. It's screaming, retreat, go back to your comfort zone, play it small. But on the other hand, you have the higher self, the part of you that craves growth. It sees that exact same feeling of fear as a compass. It's a messenger, guiding you toward your edges, toward your purpose. It's actually an invitation to expand and become more.
So to make this a little more real, let's give them a name, fear spots. These are those specific things in your life, you know what I'm talking about. They can be big or small, where your heart, your gut is saying, yes, let's do this, but your mind just keeps putting up roadblocks. Those fear spots, that's exactly what the compass is pointing to.
And this quote by Steven Pressfield just absolutely nails it. Fear isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. So often, it's the clearest sign that you're on the exact right path. The amount of resistance you feel is directly proportional to how important that thing is to you. In that sense, fear literally becomes your North Star for what matters most.
All right, so let's say we decide to follow the compass. What happens then? Let's switch gears and get into the science of it all. We're moving away from the philosophy of fear and into the psychology of what's actually happening in our brains when we decide to push through it.
It's a great question, right? Because, man, it really does feel like a battle inside our own heads sometimes. Well, it turns out psychologists have actually mapped this whole internal conflict. They've broken down the exact mental steps that lead from feeling scared to doing something courageous.
Okay, I know this looks a little complicated, but just hang with me for a second. This is called the dual process model of courage, and it's basically a flowchart of the journey from a scary trigger to a brave action. The big takeaway here is that courage isn't some random flash of bravery. It's a very deliberate step-by-step process, and we're about to break down the most important parts right now.
So, at the very center of that crazy flowchart is this one idea, the approach-avoidance conflict. Think of it like a mental tug-of-war. On one side, your brain is pulling to avoid the risk and the potential pain. On the other side, it's pulling to approach the meaningful goal, the noble outcome. Courage is simply what happens when the approach side wins that tug-of-war.
So we can boil that whole complex model down into a super practical checklist. When you're faced with fear, your brain is basically running through 3 questions. First, is this meaningful to me? Does it line up with my values? Second, can I do this? Do I believe I have the skills or the resources to handle it? And third,
Am I all in? Have I made a clear decision to engage? A yes to all three, that's the green light for action.
Okay, so we've covered the philosophy, we've covered the science, now we get to the most important part, how to turn all this theory into actual action. This whole section is about giving you some simple, but really powerful tools you can start using, like today. And here's the fundamental truth of it all. You can't just think your way out of fear. It doesn't work. In fact, doing nothing just breeds more doubt and more anxiety. The only real antidote to fear is action. Confidence isn't something you just have. It's something you build brick by doing the thing you're afraid of.
So, our first tool is something called fear setting, made popular by Ferriss. It's a really simple writing exercise. First, you define your fear. Get specific. What is the absolute worst-case scenario? Write it all down. Second, you list all the ways you could prevent that from happening. And third, you figure out, okay, if the worst actually happened, how would I get back on my feet? What would I do to repair the damage? It takes this big, vague, terrifying cloud of anxiety and makes it concrete and way more manageable.
All right, tool number 2 is something called fear-apy. Think of it like exposure therapy, but for your everyday life. The process is dead simple. Each day, you pick one of your fear spots, just one thing you've been putting off, then you just do it. It doesn't matter how small the action is. The next day, you do it again. The whole point is to build a habit of action, to prove to yourself one tiny step at a time that you can move through fear. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Check out this comment from someone who actually did the fear-setting exercise. They went from being totally paralyzed by all these what-ifs to feeling relieved and energized. And why? Because they took the fear out of their head and trapped it on a piece of paper. It just demystifies the whole thing. It really, really works. So that brings us to our final and honestly the most important question. Not what you're going to do tomorrow or next week or next year, but what is one small fear spot, one thing you've been avoiding that you are going to face today? Because that's it. That's the moment your relationship with fear really begins to change.